Keep your emotions out of the workplace. That is the single biggest misconception that I hear about work. Because business of any kind is really just a series of relationships. And we bring our emotional selves to all of our relationships. Who we are anywhere is who we are everywhere. So our emotions directly affect our success at work. But knowing how to strengthen our work relationships can be tough. It isn't always clear how to talk about our feelings and remain professional at the same time. I'm Dr. Emily Anhalt, a clinical psychologist with 15 years of experience supporting people with their work relationships. And I'm thrilled to be here to share some tools and tips for deepening your connections at work. Let's jump right in. In this course, we'll be learning how to flex our feels and break an emotional sweat. And we'll do that by practicing our emotional push-ups. But what is an emotional push-up? So a physical push-up is a small physical exertion that helps us get stronger. And if we only do one, we're not going to see much progress. But if we do just a few more than we think we can every day, not only will we increase our physical strength, but we'll also boost our future physical health. An emotional push-up is the same idea. It's any small emotional exertion that puts you just a little outside of your comfort zone so you can grow. They help us get emotionally stronger now and also prevent emotional issues later. Now, what's a little out of one person's comfort zone might be way out of another person's. So you'll have to think a little bit about what your personal emotional workout routine should be. For example, if you're someone who says yes to everything that's asked of you, and then you end up feeling overwhelmed and resentful, an emotional push-up for you might be just saying a kind but firm no to one small thing today. Whereas if you tend to focus on yourself most of the time, an emotional push-up might be to offer to help someone else with a small task. Other examples of emotional push-ups are things like apologizing for a mistake, asking for feedback from a direct report, meditating for 5 minutes in the morning, letting yourself feel sad about a loss, celebrating a win, or putting your phone away after 10 p.m. and paying attention to how you feel. An important part of the process is the reflection of how the push-up makes you feel. It's not actually our experiences, but our reflection on our experiences that leads to change. I'll be suggesting emotional push-ups throughout this course, and you can adjust them to your comfort level. After each one, pause and ask yourself, okay, how was that for me? And if it was uncomfortable, why? What might I have gotten out of it? With that, let's jump into our first chapter. I'm sure you've heard the term work-life balance, but what does that even mean these days? Our work and our personal lives are overlapping more than ever. Many of us work from home, we answer emails until midnight, our colleagues are our friends, and we're doing work that we love, which means some of our identity and life is being defined by the work that we do. While the culture of some organizations is to favor the analytic and rational over the emotional, the truth is keeping our emotions out of the workplace is a fantasy. Which brings me to a psychological phenomenon that I'm seeing a lot of right now. It's called institutional transference. Institutional transference happens when we put feelings about something other than work onto our place of work, or vice versa. For example, if you're feeling unsupported by leadership at your company, you might start to feel that your spouse is unsupportive. Institutional transference happens all the time, but especially when we have a lot of emotions and not a lot of control. In these cases, our feelings can get disguised as other, more acceptable issues. Here's an example. I was speaking with someone recently who said that a new CEO was appointed at her company, and she seemed to be the only person who was worried about their ability to lead. When I asked her to check in with herself about where else in her life this feeling might belong, or where else it might be showing up, she said that her son, who has unique learning needs, just got a new teacher who is not as caring or competent as his last teacher, and she's feeling worried about that too. I asked her to reflect on why it might be easier to be more upset or worried about one of these things than the other. And she told me in her case, it's less scary to think the CEO will be bad because worst case scenario, she can switch companies. Whereas this school is the only viable option for her son right now, so it feels very high stakes. As she realized this, though, it helped her contextualize her worry. So, whenever a new or worse than usual issue pops up at work for you, it's important to take a step back and think about what else might be at play. Try going through this exercise with one thing that's been frustrating for you at work lately. By examining who you are, what you feel, and what you need in one part of your life, you'll better understand all parts of your life. One of the most common questions I get about mental health in the workplace is about how much of our personal lives we should share at work. To answer this question, I'm going to share a concept I call boundaried vulnerability. Boundaried vulnerability describes the act of sharing enough of ourselves that we invite connection with others, without sharing so much that we wake up with an emotional hangover or rely on our coworkers to be our therapists. We all tend to be somewhere on a spectrum from too tight to too leaky when it comes to how much we share. Too tight means we're all buttoned up. We don't share vulnerably at all. While too leaky means we share in a way that requires other people to take care of us in ways that they're not responsible for or even able to. And in the middle of this spectrum is boundaried vulnerability. Imagine you have a meeting with your manager and they show up looking flustered and overwhelmed. So you ask how they're doing. Are they okay? Too leaky would be if they just unload on you. They tell you all of the things they hate about their manager. They talk about how these things happen to them at every job. And by the way, it's happening at home with their partner, and that's why they're getting a divorce. And then they ask you what they should do and how to fix it. Whew, that's too leaky. They've become a puddle on the floor that you now have to clean up. On the other hand, too tight might be them saying, yeah, I'm completely fine. Everything is great. Boundaried vulnerability in the middle sounds something like this. Yeah, I'm having a tough day. There's a lot going on that I'm sorting through. I've been navigating a tough relationship with my manager, but I'm getting the support I need. Thanks for checking in with me. Take a few minutes to think about where you tend to live on the sharing spectrum, and challenge yourself to take a step toward the middle today. So if you tend to be a little tight, try sharing a little more of yourself. And if you tend to be a bit leaky, maybe rein it in just a little bit today and make space for someone else to share. Every relationship dynamic between two people is co-created by both people. This is a powerful thing to remember because it allows us to take responsibility for our part in things that are going right or wrong and change them if we want things in the relationship to change. For example, have you ever felt annoyed, frustrated, or judgmental towards someone else at work? If you're nodding your head yes right now, you're in good company. All of us feel these things toward our colleagues sometimes. But if there's one thing I know about building self-awareness, it's that we can learn a lot about ourselves from the reactions and feelings we have about other people. Take a second to reflect on some of the things you've felt frustrated about lately. Are there any patterns you can identify across examples? Like, do you tend to get frustrated with the same person often? Or do problems tend to crop up with people in positions of authority? Or maybe in moments when you feel evaluated or judged? Maybe you notice that the common thread is that people get on your nerves when you haven't gotten enough sleep or been exercising and eating well. All right, do you have an idea of what that thing is for you? In the next video, I'm going to walk you through an emotional push-up that I try to do every time I'm feeling frustrated, judgmental, or annoyed with someone else. You may have heard that age-old wisdom that the things that bother us about other people are really just things we don't like about ourselves. Well, there's truth to that. But in my experience, it can be a little more complicated. Let's dive into our first emotional push-up, and I'll show you what I mean. The emotional push-up that we're about to do can help you build self-awareness using a frustration that you have with someone else at work. The premise here is that when you feel judgmental or annoyed or frustrated with another person, that there might be one of three things happening. And we call those three things join, jealous, and jump. Join means that we identify with this trait, that this thing we don't like in the other person is something that we recognize in ourselves, maybe something we don't really like about ourselves. Jealous means we might feel some envy that this other person has a resource or ability that we wish we had. And jump means that we've jumped in our mind to a situation from our past, that we associate this behavior we don't like with something that we've been through before. This is all easier to understand with an example. So step 1 of this push-up is think of something that bothers you about someone else at work. And this shouldn't be a huge egregious thing. It shouldn't be toxic behavior. This is something that annoys you a little, something that seems to bug you more than it bugs other people. Remember the example you came up with in the last movie? You can use that. The example I'm going to use is frustration with a colleague who's very attention-seeking. This person tends to speak over everyone at meetings and hog the spotlight and just neglect to make space for other people. All right, so the next step of this push-up is to think through join, jealous, and jump. And it might be that only one of these rings true for you, maybe 2, maybe all 3. So let's start with join. When it comes to your example, does it resonate with you at all that this thing that bothers you about your colleague is also true about you in some way? In my example, it might be, then I know I can also be a little attention-seeking, and I don't love this trait about myself. So that's join. Next is jealous. Does it resonate with you that you might feel a little jealous about a resource or ability that your colleague has? For example, maybe I wish I got a little more attention at work. Or maybe I wish that I felt brave enough to step into the spotlight. Finally, let's do jump. Can you think of anyone in your past who behaved this way? For example, maybe I had a sibling who was very attention-seeking, and I don't feel that I got the attention I needed, so now when I see it in others, I jump back to that feeling, and I'm quick to pass judgment. Go ahead and take a moment to think through these 3 possibilities. What came up for you? What might you learn about yourself? Running yourself through this exercise might not completely change how you feel about the behavior, and sometimes none of these, join, jealous, or jump, will feel quite right. But often when I do this exercise, I realize that my judgment or frustration with this other person is at least partially my own stuff to work through. And just realizing this can really lessen how intense I feel about it, and it might change how I deal with it. So challenge yourself to do this every time. There is so much talk out there about empathy. But what we really need to remember is that empathy involves an emotional component. If you intellectually understand what someone else is feeling, but you are not feeling it, that's not empathy. That's sympathy. Empathy means actually allowing yourself to feel what someone else is feeling in order to understand them. And this can be tough because we don't always want to feel what someone else is feeling. It's also difficult to empathize with any emotion in someone else that we're not comfortable acknowledging in ourselves. For example, I worked with a CEO who pushed away her anger because she was taught that anger is a sign of weakness. So when people on her team felt angry or even just frustrated, it made her uncomfortable and she had trouble empathizing with them. To get more comfortable with your own emotions, practice leaning into your feelings instead of away from them. So when you're angry, take a kickboxing class. When you're feeling down, put on a sad movie or music. And when you feel excited or proud, call a friend and brag a little. Another reason we sometimes resist being empathetic is that we worry that by really feeling what someone else is feeling, we're taking on their problems. This can lead to emotional exhaustion and burnout and make it difficult for us to offer support or empathy. Boundaries will help with this. Boundaries allow us to hold space for someone else's emotions and experiences without becoming overwhelmed or feeling like we have to fix their problems. And some people worry that having strong boundaries means they're not being empathetic. But actually, boundaries and empathy are deeply intertwined. When we have strong boundaries, we're better equipped to understand and respect the emotions, needs, and perspectives of other people, while also taking care of ourselves. So here are a few tips for having good boundaries at work. The first thing is you're going to need to figure out what your boundaries are. Where are you flexible and where do you need to take a firm stand? For example, maybe you're open to working late, but you're not willing to skip your children's events. Second, communicate clearly and specifically. For example, if you don't want to work in the evenings, state what your working hours are. Third, be consistent. Stick to your boundaries and communicate any changes to them in a timely and respectful manner. And finally, hold others accountable. If someone violates your boundaries, communicate your concerns in a calm and assertive manner. In our next video, we're going to do an emotional push-up that will help build empathy for the people in our lives and will help them build empathy for us. All right, let's practice an emotional push-up that will help you develop more empathy for the people in your life and will help them have more empathy for you. Have you ever felt really frustrated or annoyed with someone, but then you find out more context or information about their behavior, and suddenly you can understand where they're coming from? The tool we're going to create today is based on this idea, the proven psychological concept that the more we understand about someone, the better we tend to be at empathizing with them. I call this tool the Emotional Fitness Survey. The Emotional Fitness Survey empowers people to tell us what they need to do their best work, and it serves as a reference guide throughout the relationship. So here's how it works. You're going to create a simple digital survey that asks questions about what people need from you, leadership, and the company in order to do their best work. Example questions are things like, do you like to be praised in public or in private? How do you like to receive feedback? And how would I know if you were feeling stressed or overwhelmed? For more ideas about questions you might use, I've included a sample survey in the exercise files. So you'll send this survey to everyone you work closely with. Make sure they know that their answers will be shared with the whole team so they can tailor their responses accordingly, and also be sure to fill it out yourself. Once everyone has filled it out, put the answers in a spreadsheet and share it with everyone. Not only does this communicate that you care about what people's needs are, but it also makes it a lot easier to empathize with and meet those needs. For example, one of my colleagues recently experienced a difficult family situation. So I checked her answers on the survey and I saw that she answered the question, how do you like to be cared for or cheered up during a tough time? By saying, I like a little bit of space, and then I like to know that I'm being held in mind. So I gave her a few days, and then I sent her some of her favorite treats. Go ahead and put together your survey with questions that will help you get to know your colleagues and will let them get to know you. Let's talk about the power of play in the workplace. I'm curious, when is the last time you played? Really. Take a second to reflect on the role that play has had in your life. Were you encouraged to play growing up? Did you have people in your life who were excited to play with you? Do you feel open and safe being playful at work? Why or why not? When I ask adults when they last played, they usually tell me about a board game or a sports game or a video game. And don't get me wrong, those are great types of play, but play can mean so many things. I personally love the improv definition of play, which is that when someone comes to us with an idea, we don't say, yes, but. We don't even just say yes. We say yes, and. We meet them in their idea, we build on that idea, and together we get somewhere that neither person could have gotten alone. So, for example, brainstorming is a type of play, and so is taking a joke way too far with a friend. I want you to reframe what the word play means in your mind, because play has such amazing benefits to our relationships. It builds community and culture, improves memory, increases creativity and spontaneity. I even read a study years ago that showed that people who play regularly live longer by a statistically significant number of years than people who don't play regularly. So why don't we play more? Besides being overworked and tired, a lot of people don't play because being playful means being vulnerable. When we play, our guards come down naturally, which can be scary for people who work hard to keep their guards up. But as you build play into your routine, it becomes easier. To do this, you can start meetings with an icebreaker game, or host an annual game of Capture the Flag, or you can do today's emotional push-up. In our next video, I'm going to share my favorite game to play at work and a resource for more ways to play. But before we get there, write down the conditions you need to feel safe and excited to play in the workplace. For example, maybe you need to see people in leadership positions being playful first. Maybe you need to have some kind of connection established with your colleagues already. Or perhaps you're open to playing as long as someone else is facilitating. The more you know about what you need, the more likely you'll be to lean in when it's time to play. Now that we know how important it is to play at work, I want to share my absolute favorite game. This game is amazing because it can be played with 2 people or 100 people, and it shows just how deeply our minds are connected. So I especially like to facilitate this game when people are feeling disconnected or are having trouble thinking together. One quick caveat that I like to share is that the game can last 10 seconds or 10 minutes, but if everyone sticks with it, you will win the game together. I have never unsuccessfully completed a round. So this game is called Got It, and here's how it works. Everyone is going to think of a random word or common 2-word phrase. It can be anything, something like prehistoric or banana, Thailand, Brad Pitt, hocus pocus. There are no wrong answers here. When a player has thought of the word or common phrase, they're going to raise their hand and say, got it. The first 2 players who say got it will count down together. 3, 2, 1, and then together they will say the words that they were thinking at the same time. Or if you're playing digitally, they can type their words into the chat and then 3, 2, 1, press enter. All right, so now there are these 2 words. Next, everyone will try to think of a new word that somehow links the 2 words that have been said. There's no wrong way to do this. However your brain connects the words is great. So for elephant and airplane, a person might think big or gray or magical. Whoever thinks they have a word that connects the 2 initial words will say, got it. The first 2 to have it again count down together and together say their new word. And this is going to continue on until the 2 people counting down say the same word at the same time. This often happens a lot more quickly than you would expect. So a few things to remember about this game. Firstly, Got It tends to work best when there's a facilitator who is calling on people and counting them down, and also keeping people's spirits high if it's taking a while to get to the same word. Next, once a word has been said, it can't be used again during that round. And finally, in larger groups, you might try a rule that when 2 people say got it, they are out for thinking up the next words to make sure everyone has a chance to participate. I love Got It because it shows how similarly we all think at a base level, and it makes people feel really connected in their thought processes. Take a second to try this game out with a willing participant. It works great online and in person. And check out the exercise files for more work-appropriate games and ways to play. Our next topic can be a little touchy: giving and receiving feedback. I'm curious, what's the culture of feedback where you work? Is it structured or freeform? Can you count on it happening, or does it happen randomly? Is feedback given in written form or face-to-face? In my experience, people tend to shy away from both giving and asking for feedback directly. And this can be for all kinds of reasons. If our caregivers growing up didn't ask how we felt about things, or if our workplaces have not had cultures of regular feedback, we might not have any model for what feedback is supposed to look and feel like. But feedback, both positive and negative, is a very powerful way to build self-awareness. It's pretty tough to change something before we know about it. And it's often the case that people don't share their thoughts and feedback until you ask for it. Also, for the record, we all need validation from time to time. So we're going to do a push-up today that is all about soliciting and giving feedback. What I'd like you to do right now is text or email 3 people. can be a friend, family member, colleague, a manager, anyone. And ask them to share one thing you're doing well and one thing that you could do 10% better. If you're wondering how to word this, you might say something like this. Hi there, I am working on my emotional fitness, and today's challenge is to ask for feedback from someone whose perspective I respect. I would love it if you would share one thing I'm doing well as a partner, colleague, friend, and one thing I could do 10% better. Thank you for helping me grow my self-awareness and be the best version of myself I can be. Then, once you get a response, ask them if they'd like for you to return the favor. Allowing someone to opt into feedback is an important part of the process. So if they say yes, try to give them thoughtful, kind, and direct feedback about what they're doing well and what they could be doing 10% better. In our next video, we'll talk about how to take in difficult feedback thoughtfully. So, what happens when someone shares difficult or negative feedback? No one wants to hear that they've messed up or let people down. But the way you respond will inform what people share with you in the future. So here's a step-by-step process for taking in negative feedback thoughtfully. Step 1 is to practice giving yourself space between hearing the feedback and responding. When we respond right away, it's often from a defensive place. So give yourself 10 minutes before saying anything. You can say, I'd like a few minutes to think about that, and then let's talk about it. Step 2 is to spend that 10 minutes taking stock of what you're feeling. Do you feel defensive, misunderstood? Maybe it's something you're already working on. Take a few thoughtful breaths to center yourself and to remember that this feedback is about one facet of you, not all of who you are. Step 3 is to thank the feedback giver for sharing this with you. It's a gift to be trusted with tough feedback, and it's very vulnerable to give it. Do not use this time to share any feedback of your own, even if you think they're guilty of the same behavior. Step 4 is to get curious. Ask questions to understand where the feedback is coming from and what effect your choice or behavior has had on others. You can ask questions like, can you tell me more about that? What was that like for you? What might I do differently next time? And finally, step 5, thank them, again, for trusting you with their feedback, even if you don't agree with it, and let them know that you'll think more about it. Really reflect on what's been said. To prioritize growth, we have to build a muscle for handling and integrating criticism. Even though this process can be uncomfortable, we are giving ourselves a huge opportunity to grow if we can embrace it. Conflict is uncomfortable. Of course it is. And most of us did not have healthy and thoughtful examples of conflict modeled to us growing up. Some people had parents who never fought in front of them, even when it was clear that things were off. Some people might have witnessed a ton of conflict growing up, but not a lot of repair. For all kinds of reasons, our relationship to conflict might be complicated. But in any relationship, whether it's romantic or a friendship, with family or at work, I believe that conflict to a relationship is like exercise to a muscle. Exercise creates micro tears in muscle. When you lift weights, you're actually doing a tiny bit of damage to your muscles. But if after the exercise you rest the muscle and drink water, eat protein, then the muscle heals stronger than it was before and adapts to better handle the stress of exercise. So over time, not only will you be able to lift more weight than you could before, but you'll also be able to handle other kinds of stress to your body better. So this is how I think about conflict in a relationship. The key is repair. When we work through conflict thoughtfully, the relationship will be stronger and better able to handle stress than it was before. And in fact, there's a certain kind of strength and closeness in a relationship that can only happen on the other side of conflict. Think of a relationship of yours where you've gone through something tough together, but you came out the other side closer than you were before. So my recommendation to anyone in any kind of relationship is don't avoid conflict. Just make sure you prioritize emotional repair and healing afterwards. In our next video, we're going to practice repair after conflict. But first, take a second to think and write about how you tend to feel about conflict and how you usually handle it. Do you avoid it at all costs? Are you super apologetic even when you're not sure what you did wrong? Do you speak out of anger and then wish you'd taken some time to think about things? By reflecting on how you handle conflict, you'll increase your ability to move toward a healthier and more effective style. Let's practice the repair part of conflict together with an emotional push-up. So step 1 in this push-up is to think of a small conflict you've had recently. This could be a little tiff that you had with your partner, or a disagreement with a boss, or maybe a coworker said something that hurt your feelings recently and you just moved past it. Once you've thought of your example, step 2 of this push-up is to practice a repair conversation with that person. You don't actually have to reach out to them yet. First, get comfortable with the language you might use. You can use this simple formula. When you said X, I felt Y. So for example, when you told me I'm too sensitive, I felt embarrassed and misunderstood. Then you'll follow it up with your why. Why are you bringing this up? I wasn't going to say anything, but our relationship is really important to me, and I realized I'd rather share how I feel now than let it quietly damage our dynamic. So the goal here is just to see how it feels to imagine leaning into repair in this way. Step 3 of this push-up for those who are feeling ready is to reach out to this person with this language. Maybe you send a quick text, or maybe it'd be better to have the conversation in person. If the person gets defensive, try this phrasing. I totally hear you that you didn't intend anything negative here. I'm mostly sharing this so that you know the impact your words had on me. And it'd mean a lot to me for you just to acknowledge my feelings. If they're able to acknowledge your feelings, then thank them for hearing you, and hopefully their acknowledgement will help you move forward without resentment. Practice this every time you run into conflict, and you'll notice your relationships deepen and get stronger. Despite all of our best intentions, when faced with a struggle or conflict with another person, we can act defensively out of a desire to protect ourselves. Without realizing it, you might be adopting a me versus you mindset. The problem with this is that it can keep you from collaborating. And when you communicate from this perspective, you're likely to prime others to be defensive too. By taking a moment to shift from a me versus you mindset to an us versus the problem mindset, you'll increase your chances of working through issues and finding solutions. Let's do a push-up to practice this. I want you to think of the last time that you felt locked in opposition to someone at work. For example, I recently felt that my co-founder wanted to make a decision too quickly, without considering the possible ramifications enough. And she felt that I was not moving quickly enough. So my mindset was, I'm being thoughtful and you're being impulsive. And hers was, I'm being judicious with our time and you're dragging your feet. All right, so once you have your example, take a second to remind yourself that ultimately the two of you are on the same team. You're both working toward the success of your project or team or company. With that in mind, imagine how you could reframe the situation to an us versus the problem mindset. When my co-founder and I took a second to do this, it sounded like this. We both want this company to succeed, and both speed and quality are important for that. How can we work together to tackle this problem without wasting time or sacrificing quality? This small shift helped us put our guards down and brainstorm new solutions together. So the next time you feel things heat up in a debate with a colleague, try this mindset shift. Not you versus me, us versus the problem. Have you ever sent a message to a colleague that they completely misunderstood? A classic example is sending a message that's supposed to be sarcastic, but the receiver assumes you're being serious. This has definitely happened to me more than a few times. More than ever, a huge amount of our communications at work are happening through text. In cases where we used to speak directly to our colleagues, we now send emails or messages on Slack. The problem is a lot of information, especially emotional information, is lost when we can't see facial expressions or hear tone. To help with this problem, I want to share a tool I call Remojis, which is a mashup of the words remote and emojis. Remojis are emojis that you and your colleagues assign to certain emotional communications. For example, the turtle emoji might mean, I need more time to work on this. The upside down smiley face emoji might mean, this message was said with sarcasm. Maybe the brain emoji means, let's think before we take action. Or the heart with a bandage on it might mean, I'm feeling sensitive today. My co-founder and I recently implemented a new Remoji because we noticed that when we go to each other with a problem, it isn't always clear if we just want help solving that problem or if we're upset about the problem. So we decided that when we message each other about an issue, we'll include the chili pepper emoji if we're upset. What's great about Remojis is that you and your team can decide what kind of information you want to communicate easily. As you see miscommunications happening, add a Remoji for it. You can keep track of these in a document or channel so that everyone can see what's been added. To practice this, think of one text miscommunication that's happened on your team recently. What information was lost? What Remoji could have been created that might have prevented the problem? You'll be surprised by how many communication issues are prevented by developing a Remoji library with your team. People often come to me and ask how they can help their colleagues or manager or boss be more emotionally thoughtful or healthy. But the secret is, it all starts with you. Since we each only have control over ourselves, the best place to start is our own mental and emotional health. By taking this course, you've done a huge service to everyone you interact with. Think back to the different tools we've learned together and imagine where you might be able to implement those emotional push-ups. In fact, stop now and pick at least one emotional push-up to practice today. You'll be surprised at how eager people are to join you when they see you lead by example. If you want to keep your emotional fitness routine going, check out my company, Koa, joinkoa.com, which is a gym for mental health. Head to my website, dremilyanholt.com, or find me on Twitter. I'm so incredibly passionate about this work because I've seen the impact it can make. Keep flexing those feels and breaking an emotional sweat, and I promise you, you will notice a difference in your relationships at work and at home.